Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
We're talking Warwick Davis, terrorizing people with rhyming for 3 movies, so join the sleaze.
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for, as of this episode you're listening to, it has to have been over 3 years now. We have something like 70-plus bonus episodes waiting for you guys. Patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. Definitely consider that if you haven't made the jump yet. And speaking of which, we had a lot of people make the jump this week. So we'll give them their shout outs here. We have Danny Schick, Travers C, Andrew H, Chad Burns, Ryan E. Torgerson, just Brandon.
All
Welcome,
right.
Brandon. Jared Scott, Harsh Malarkey, Eric Hill, Jennifer, Ben, Vol. Oh boy, I'm so sorry, friend. Vaj Tulik, and we're still going. Ross McWilliams, Joseph, Seamus Turner Glennon, Taylor, and last but not least, Mitch Kirka.
Awesome.
So thanks
Thank you,
to all of you folks for supporting the show. Hope you guys are enjoying all those bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, obviously, where we're still talking about new release genre films, because believe it or not, they are still coming out sometimes.
They're trying.
I'm very excited because soon, I believe, just after this episode comes out, we'll probably be talking about The Empty Man, finally.
Oh, yeah. Which was decent.
So
really good.
I'm very excited to talk about that whenever we get around to it. But that's Patreon's the one plug. The other plug, Apple Podcasts. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, which I know that you are, I see the stats every week. I check them. I see you right now listening on Apple Podcasts. While you're listening to this, scroll to the bottom. Give us a good old rating and review down there at the bottom. Helps us climb the rank at iTunes and find new listeners.
Yes, please.
And the new plug, the third plug, I guess it's not so new anymore. It's been the plug for a couple months now. We've got merch now. If you guys are interested in getting the Sleazoids poster art by horror artist Trevor Henderson, friend and guest of the show, you can now get that pretty much on anything that you would like. The link is in the description. You can get it on mugs. You can get it on
pillows,
sweaters. Someone got a pillow.
That's right.
There is some amazing things that you can put our logo on. You can find that, again, link in the description or at sleazoidspodcast.com. All right. That's it for the plugs, though. Welcome back. Welcome to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and also joining me, as always, my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome back. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you guys, free listeners, would have heard from us, and we would have had special guest Adam Naiman, the one of the editors over at CinemaScope and a writer for The Ringer and also an author in his own right. He actually dropped news of his brand new coffee table book on David Fincher on last week's episode. So definitely look into that. He brought with him Alfred Hitchcock's Shadow of a Doubt from 1943, as well as The Stepfather from 1987. We were kind of talking about serial killing family members in suburbia.
Yes.
Which was a lot of fun to talk about with him. Again, if you haven't heard that episode, that was the free episode on a new podcast listener of choice from 2 weeks ago. And then last week, bouncing off Adam's episode for the Patreon listeners exclusively, we had to copy a little bit of Adam's programming, and we plugged in an episode that kind of paired with it perfectly that I've had planned since like before we started the show. And we finally did Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window.
Oh, good.
We're getting our Alfred Hitchcock out for the year early. And we paired that one with Joe Dante's The Burbs, which is another sort of similar to Adam's pairing, an 80s update on the Hitchcock. But The Burbs, Tom Hanks goes a little bit cannibal conspiracy mode, which felt very appropriate for the times of being trapped in your apartment, looking out the window, watching your screens, hoping a story unfolds.
Watching your neighbors.
Tom Hanks would absolutely just be a QAnon guy today, if he was around. So again, that was last week's bonus episode. So patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast if you want Rear Window and The Burbs. But moving on to this week, we have a very special returning guest coming on this week. This is his third time making an appearance on the show. Many of you will remember him, I'm sure. He is a horror filmmaker and author. His film may or may not have appeared on the official Sleazoids top 10 of last year.
That's right.
And that is filmmaker Perry Ruhland. Perry, how you doing?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, I mean, we're very glad to have you back because the last time you came on the show, you brought with you a little film called Midori.
Yeah.
Just about the most depraved anime film anyone has ever made me watch, that featured like a dog being squished and all matter of sexual violence. And it was a great conversation. It was a great film. But shortly after we talked about that film, it became a TikTok sensation.
It did, yeah. The Zoomers discovered Midori.
Zoomers were taking the Midori challenge and seeing how much they could watch of Midori before, feeling sick.
Yeah, my buddy was listening to that episode during work, and he said he had to turn it off until he got home because he was like, I don't know if I should be like fixing cars while they're talking about what they're talking about. It was very funny.
Yeah, well, hopefully, because you talked about Sungazer a couple months ago, soon the teens on TikTok will be doing the Sungazer challenge where they all give me money on Vimeo.
It will be like you have to rent the film, you watch the film, and then if you try to see the sun gazer for yourself, you go outside and you stare at the sun for many hours.
I am endorsing this as a thing children should do.
Yes, it's very much like when A24 tried to do the Pepto and Scotch challenge from First Reformed.
That's one of my favorite modern marketing things. That tweet was up for not very long, we'll say. Yeah, that's on the level of shit that game companies do. When EA sent brass knuckles to people for The Godfather 2 and realized that you legally cannot own brass knuckles in the United States.
That is so good.
Really good.
That's awesome. Perry, you've been on the show a couple times. You know how it goes. But knowing your history on this show, what depraved manga inspired movies have you brought with you this week?
Hell yeah!
I'm glad you asked. I guess since I've done this 3 times, I guess I'm the manga and anime guy. Which is a good
that is you. You're the only one who's ever brought it on.
I'm more than happy to fill that role. So once again, like last time, I paired a non-Japanese horror film with a manga adaptation. So I did 2 very strange, very eerie horror movies about painters. One is The House with Laughing Windows by Pupi Avati. Pupi Avati. And the other is Guinea Pig Part 6, Mermaid in a Manhole by Hideshi Hino.
Amazing title.
It's an incredible title. The first film, House Laughing Windows, like a folk horror giallo kind of thing. Very Don't Torture a Duckling. And the second is... we'll talk more about it later, but it is the 6th film in a very infamous gore movie series that is an adaptation of a manga written by the director.
Okay. Is this your favorite one, by the way? Have you seen them all?
I've seen all the Guinea Pig films. I've seen the unofficial Guinea Pig film, and I've seen the 4 American Guinea Pig films from last decade. So I'd say I have a pretty solid guinea pig foundation.
Gotcha.
And
we got the guinea pig scholar.
That's
yeah,
on the show.
A dubious accolade, but I think, yeah, I mean, Mermaid and Manhole is definitely my favorite of the bunch.
Okay, sweet.
All right. Well, I think that we will jump into it here, and we'll probably start this week chronologically. We will start with The House with the Laughing Windows.
Anch'io, ma per me è diverso. Io quando voglio posso andarmene di qua.
Right, we are talking about The House with Laughing Windows, the 1976 Italian giallo film, co-written and directed by Pupi Avati. The film, as Perry mentioned, is very much in the vein of kind of like the 70s giallo films of the time. Don't Torture a Duckling was one that I thought about a lot. Obviously, you know, something like Argento's Deep Red is in there as well. And I was actually, I think, mostly reminded somehow of a little bit of Sergio Martino, something like Torso, or what's that really long titled one that he's got? Your Vice
Your
is
Vice
Locked.
in Locked Room and Only I Have the Key. One of the great giallo titles.
Yes. So it's very much in the vein of kind of like these occasionally supernatural kind of feeling murder mystery stories with obviously that very kind of heightened Italian style to them. This one has kind of like a sepia-toned opening to it that is all slow-mo screaming of a man tied up and just being stabbed to death, very much sort of like the opening flashback to something like The Beyond. And I love that he's like screaming and he's like, "My sweet colors, hot colors flowing down my arms."
Yeah, just death poetry.
It's beautiful. It's like this super grainy, like mostly close-ups of his body, like writhing in slow motion while he's getting stabbed. I read a review that compared it to Kenneth Anger's Fireworks, and it very much feels in that vein, like it's something out of early experimental cinema.
Yeah. I mean that opening has a really great sense of atmosphere, and it kind of I would say maybe regretfully so. It kind of made me anticipate a little bit more of like a kind of visually explosive film, which then it doesn't really.
It is not.
It is not. It definitely gets to some really cool places, especially in its big climax, where it finally kind of merges with its opening scene a little bit like that. But I was definitely, anticipating some like some Bava or Argento like insanity watching the opening sequence there. And I won't say it's necessarily disappointing. I've watched enough giallos to know that a lot of the time there's a lot of Italian bearded men sitting in rooms talking to each other and giving each other information about history or something before there's there's the more suspense sequences that take place which take on that more heightened quality to them.
I was expecting like more killing in general, to be honest, and it turned into something that reminded me more of like The Wicker Man or City of the Dead or something like that. Just kind of like
it's
somebody
definitely got
coming
a little
into
bit
a
of
town
that,
and
that folk
discovering
horror vibe
things.
to it.
Yeah, for sure.
The Wicker Man's a great comparison because it has a very folk horror setup where basically it's like this art historian comes into this very strange small Italian town, a very rural town, which is important to note because most giallo is, it's very downtown swinging Italy stuff. It's usually set in like Rome, but this and Don't Torture a Duckling are like the big two I can think of off the top of my head that are really focused on like rural Italy. And this guy comes in and he has to restore a very clearly cursed painting of a guy who is supposed to be Saint Sebastian, but I've never seen Saint Sebastian martyred like this because he's like it has like the Saint Sebastian imagery of this like a beautiful young man, but instead of being bound to a tree and pierced with arrows or whatever, a bunch of screaming ladies are jabbing knives into his chest and shoulder blades, and it's a very enigmatic painting. And as a folk horror protagonist is to do, he gets a bit too interested in the lore and gets a bit over his head.
Yeah, he was looking up the Saint Sebastian like wiki, and he gets really frightened about it. I love too that when he shows up into this small, like Italian village, there's this very kind of like tranquil, kind of like beautiful score that's playing. There's this really nice like location shooting as he's being taken in through the town. There's a little bit of that folk horror element where some elements of just the people in the town, they seem a little bit odd to him, but in that way that it's more like quirky. Like at first it's just kind of like, this is an interesting group of people. I'm here to do a job that they've hired me to do. And then some strange vibes, the strange vibes just kind of take over as, he looks at that painting, which is on like this rotting wall of like a local church. And they're like, yeah, so here's this really horrifying painting that we keep in our church. And it is done by this very mysterious, long dead artist named Legnani. And I love that his first reaction to seeing the painting is obviously, it's a very repulsive image, but he's so very intrigued by it. And I love that his reaction is he understood death so well. He saw everything.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, someone else is like, do we really need like this rubbish like in our church? Like this is just like a snuff painting.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually a pretty good representation of what it's like, watching a shitty movie as a Sleazoids fan. You find the art in the terror.
Exactly. There's just there's us three going, wow, this filmmaker really understood death so well, and everyone else is like, what the fuck is this? But very quickly, again, sort of things start to get a little off in this town. He receives a mysterious call from some person who sounds exactly like Zelda in Anguish. That's like,
yeah,
don't
a little bit.
touch the painting. And Jamie's right. It's got a little bit of that sort of like Wicker Man and Blood on Satan's Claw or City of the Living Dead, where the creepy townsfolk seem to have this sort of strange relationship to the art and the history, and they're giving him information, but it's kind of vague. And sometimes he'll ask very specific questions, and they will just kind of be like, "Don't worry too much about it,"
Yeah, and it's got that classic like small town vibe. I think there's a line where they say like everybody knows everything here, So it's just very much that they're all together, they all know each other, and something is afoot.
Mm-hmm. And he's been hired by this local townsman who's this very small man. They say that he's not tall, but he's big, and he's led the village to all sorts of unity and prosperity, but at the cost of clearly there is some there's some secrets being held. The guy who's telling him about how prosperous their village is, he has this like mute wife who just like walks around the house like holding dogs, and sometimes she just walks around the town and he's just kind of like all right, this is just a normal, she's seen some shit, but I don't know what it is. I'm sure it has nothing to do with this crazy painting of murdered people.
Couldn't possibly.
Yeah. There's a lot of mysterious going-ons in the town. And I mean, I'm really a sucker for, like Town with a Dark Secret movies, where someone moves in, there's just weird shit.
Yeah, definitely.
Because more than just the painting, there is a titular house with laughing windows in it, which is one of the great exteriors in movies, is this like old rundown Italian like hotel that has, it's on the poster, like all these red lips that are painted over the windows. And the movie is just filled with weird imagery like that in this town. Like there's like all the strange things the townsfolk are doing. There's just these like very eerie set dressings with lots of like crosses and stuff. There's like a refrigerator full of snails. It's just packed with a bunch of like unsettling but not necessarily dangerous things lying around, or they don't appear to be dangerous at first, at least.
Yeah, there's a lot of like, things that again just seem kind of strange, but ultimately kind of harmless until all of a suddenly they aren't. Like when he's walking down the street and his friend, the only person in the town who like actually knows him and was just telling him, yeah, do you know what? I'm feeling great. I'm feeling healthy. He implies this history that, he might have felt, depressed or something like that. But, he's feeling great in this town. Then one night he gives him a phone call and he's like, I got to finish telling you this story about this town. You gotta like come over here. He goes over to his place and the dude is just like a dummy is just hurled out of his window and the dude just splatters on the ground like right in front of him, very sort of, very suddenly and very shockingly. And he dies, obviously, before he can tell him whatever story it was he was going to tell him about the painting and the church and the town.
Yeah,
very conveniently.
I also found it pretty funny that like as he's falling, he is screaming because presumably he was murdered. So, but I think afterwards when the lead is talking to the cop, he says something like he was upset with his life and possibly wanted to do that. And I'm like, why was he screaming?
That's what leads him on the mystery, right? Because they tell him his friend committed suicide literally like half a day after he just told him he's in like the best mental state he's been in like a decade.
yeah.
And they're like, this place is no place for a young man. There's nothing to do but drink here. There's no young women. That's a big problem in your small Italian town.
You should really get out of here. Hint, hint, wink, wink.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, the movie reminds me of like The Tenant or something, where there's all these signs like, man, you should just get out of here. You should really be gone by now. And of course, by the time that sets in for the character, it's far too late for him.
Yeah.
Well, he's too kind of intrigued. There is something about him where like he kind of needs to know. He kind of becomes obsessed with figuring out what it is that's going on, with putting these kind of like details together, which is something that they've drawn kind of smartly in the film. Mm-hmm. Because it gives you enough like just bizarre detail that you're kind of like, okay, there's got to be some sort of explanation for all of this, and eventually there is, and it's pretty great, and we'll get to it. But like also, when he like when, for example, they move him out of the hotel like into the house, and they tell him, well, we needed to give your room to someone else, and then as he's packing up all of his stuff to leave, they say, he's like, oh, where's the guy who's taken my room? And they were like, no one's taken your room. There hasn't been a like the last tourist guest in this town was like some Nazi in the 40s.
Yeah.
Like. And so he's just like, okay, so I'm the first tourist guest in, like 30 years, and they're kicking me out because they said that there's another one that doesn't exist. And then he's staying with this woman who is just like stuck in her bed, and he's hearing all these shifting footsteps and noises through the house, and he's talking to this woman who's, just bedridden, and she's just like, I live alone. I haven't heard anything. You think I'm getting up and walking around? Look at me. And there's just these strange details just like continue to build, and there is a little bit of atmosphere to some of the filmmaking as well. I love that shot of when he can hear the footsteps moving around in the house, and he looks out into the hall, and it's like this pitch black void other than like a sliver of light from like the doorway that he's standing in.
Yeah, the movie is, like, as to be expected from a giallo from this era, really stylish.
Or even all those wide shots of like climbing those tall steps to her bedroom and stuff like that.
I was going to mention the wide shots of when he enters the room that eventually ends up being like the murder room, and you can just see the entire thing. There's like 4 pillars in the middle of it, and he just kind of goes throughout, and it's just a great use of the space. It's like oddly haunting, just that empty room that he walks into.
Yeah, the landscapes of the like Italian countryside are used really well too. In a way, it reminds me of this movie Anthropophagus by Joe D'Amato.
We've been meaning to watch that because
it's really good.
Someone who did the gore for that did gore for another movie. Castle Freak did the gore for Castle Freak.
It is. I would not have expected
awesome.
that because it makes. I mean, the gore in Anthropophagus is probably the gnarliest this side of like the cannibal cycle. Well, it is technically a cannibal movie, but like the really morally repugnant cannibal cycle from Italy. Like it's
Awesome.
it's gross. But most of that movie is just like people hanging out by the Mediterranean, and this has a very similar vibe. Like the color palette is just these like, I don't know how to describe it. It feels quintessentially like Mediterranean, like these tans and these like purple sunsets and this like golden glitter off the ocean. There's that one scene by, I actually forget if it's by an ocean or a lake. I'm pretty sure it's the lake where he's talking with his friend and they're drinking beer. And like this purple water glittering. There are very few movies that get that kind of, or I'll say there are very few horror movies that get that kind of like low Mediterranean vibe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and they want to set up something too, that there is something sort of like idyllic, you know, about his time that he's spending in this village. Like there's a really funny kind of like very broad like romantic angle to the film where he meets like, you know, like this local teacher who just arrived into the village around the same time that he did. And you know he at a certain point he just like you know cooks her a nice Italian dinner, and then all of a sudden they're both like stripping because the Italian dinner got them both really horny, and you know it's the only time that like that sort of like sort of romantic music from the opening kind of like comes back, because you know there is something about spending time in this town and just you know going for bike rides like with the guy who runs the church or one of the employees who works at the church that he's like hanging out with for like a little bit. I think he's the guy who like guides him to the house that he eventually goes to, and eventually does some really gross things as well. But it's funny that like there is this kind of sort of idyllic surface of the town, and he's very drawn to it. And there's lots of sequences, as Perry was putting it, where, you know, where he's, you know, there's just this very beautiful lighting, and there's this beautiful locations, and there's this nice music, and there's this beautiful woman, and he's cooking dinner for her. And then he's spending his time restoring just the most horrifying painting that you've ever seen all day while he's at work. Meanwhile, he hears like a woman moaning in the distance while he's doing his work. And, you know, there's just all these strange things occurring, and it reminds me too of that one line that he brings up too, where he's just like, everyone says that this artist is very sensitive, but all he does is paint death without compassion. And that's kind of like the dichotomy of what he's experiencing in this town, is that there's something kind of sweet taking place with, you know, a very sick underbelly to it, which makes it a good follow-up to, you know, the last 2 weeks of episodes we've been doing about sort of like surface American suburbia hiding something very dark and sinister. Here we're seeing kind of like an Italian version of that, and obviously the Italians have to take that to about as far an extreme as one could possibly take it. Yeah, which we will say this gets to.
Well, of course, you also can't forget the fact that, you know, it's some evil painting literally inside a church. You know, they have that. A lot of Italian horror has that kind of sacrilegious element. But this and Don't Torture a Duckling, I think, are the two giallo I can think of that, like, this not as much as Don't Torture a Duckling, but they take on the institution of the church and depict the church as, like, housing some great ancient evil in it.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's something sinister
Fulci really said, like, what was up with Italians and all those kids in, like, 1970?
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things about Italian genre cinema, and this is off the top of my head, so forgive me if it's not going to be as in-depth as a conversation about it probably should be, but, you know, you can see a lot in like the cop films there, but the horror films too from like the 70s. I mean, this is during the years of lead. Like, this is when there's serious, like, constant political violence in Italy, right? It's a very like scary and dangerous time for the country. So it interests me how many like giallo and how many, well, not so much poliziotteschi, but how many giallo paint Italian society as like there is something inherently dangerous about it. Mm-hmm. There's some like great evil in Italy that's just under the surface.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something that they were experiencing. We talked about it a little bit when we were doing some of their poliziotteschi's, where they were obviously turning that street violence like into entertainment and selling it back.
Yeah,
but it's so funny. Those films are so grotesque that they're almost, it's this weird thing where it's like part American cop movie where it's kind of fun, and then the violence is so horrifying. It's just something very unique to what Italy was doing in the 70s with their films.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about Live Like a Cop, Die Like a Man.
Yes.
Which is kind of the ultimate in just, like, grotesque police movie.
Yeah.
Somehow it's so much fun.
Oh, yeah.
You, like, have a great time watching these absolute insane cops just do everything that they do, and it's horrible, but you're endlessly entertained.
In a lot of ways, one of the reasons why I'm so drawn to the House of Laughing Windows is it does feel of a piece with, not to get a bit too off track, but feels of a piece with my favorite Italian novel, which is from the same era and about broadly similar subjects, called The 20 Days of Turin by Giorgio De Maria, which is like a horror novel about a man in Turin where for 20 days there was a bunch of mysterious violence where people were like slaughtering each other at night and not remembering it, and a bunch of weird shit is popping up in the town, but everyone in the city has like made a pact to just kind of not talk about it, so they exist with this great evil. It's not like they necessarily profit off of it, or at least not all of them do, but they all have like agreed to forget it ever happened. And it's not, it hasn't gone anywhere, it hasn't gone away. I mean, the house with laughing windows, sure, a lot of the people in the town are in on, like, some dark conspiracy, but there are ordinary, innocent people in this movie who just know that there's something bad with the town, but they have to accept it.
Right.
Yeah.
They live with
that's
it.
actually one of the scariest parts in the film.
Yeah.
Is when he goes back to the town and he's, like, asking for help. And obviously we'll get to it again when we, really jump into the big reveal here. We're kind of holding our cards close to our chest here. But like that bit when he realizes, because like it's not like this thing where it's where it's like dead and buried or something, where it's revealed that the town is kind of like all involved in this and they're kind of helping. There's a turn the other cheek kind of mentality that gets brought up sort of near the end of this film, when he starts to realize what it is that this painter actually was, what it was that he did. He finds like this old recording of a man screaming and dying, and he starts trying to find townsfolk who maybe might recognize the voice of the painter, to see if that's who it was who's on the tape. He eventually starts hearing all these various stories about the painter who, he had two sisters, and he went to Brazil and apparently came back wealthy, and he returned with his sisters, but while he was gone, apparently his mother died. And they used the money to build the house that he's staying in. He finds out that he's been staying in the painter's house. And he found out that through the paintings, he was essentially trying to control death, to find some sort of sense of immortality through art, that he was painting people at their moment of their death. At one point, he is told that the painter would just visit local people on their deathbeds. They were dying anyway, and he would go in and he would paint them. But then it sort of made clear that he didn't really stop there. He didn't wait for people to die naturally to paint them. His sisters began kidnapping people for him so that he could paint them essentially being murdered. And we kind of put two and two together, and we realized that that's what is happening in the painting that he has been restoring. And what was happening in the opening scene was that his sisters were straight up murdering someone so that he could paint them in their final moments and maybe, sort of
that inspiration.
Find the answer to death. And it's sort of loosely implied that, maybe to bring their mother back, which is kind of the idea.
Not to circle back around on like the suspicious church stuff too much, but that really, the idea of a painting of Saint Sebastian, where the implication is the model for Saint Sebastian here died for the artist, like the saint died so the artist has something to paint, is a very cynical way to look at Catholic art.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Well, yeah, they even I think the priest says it at one point. He describes it as communion and sacrifice, or something like that. And yeah, ultimately, he's uncovering all of this in this really sort of like, more sort of like obsessive sort of like murder mystery style idea. He's getting all of this information kind of slowly doled out to him in kind of like exposition, but he's slowly piecing that together with the stranger sort of aspects from the style of the film. And at a certain point, he basically describes it as, he feels possessed by finding out what is going on with this town's history, how it relates to this painting, how it relates to, sort of, again, this artist trying to find immortality through art. And it's a question of, did he in some way? It's kind of, it's questions that it's kind of bringing up. Eventually he finds out that the painter supposedly, he's presumed dead because he covered himself in alcohol and set himself on fire and ran into the wilderness. And I love the one dude who's just like, yeah, that's why he's presumed dead. I can't tell you he's dead. We didn't find him. He's presumed dead. Yeah, and he tells him that like 3 or 4 times.
The flashback showing that too is really, really cool. Like a burning body against a black void. It feels very like that documentarian Rodney Asher, who did like Room 237 and The Nightmare and stuff.
Oh yeah.
It feels he has like a short film that is basically identical to that shot of like a man on fire running through a black void, which is just, it's one of my favorite images from The House Laughing Windows. It's stunning.
Yeah, well, and that too, combined with, again, how you realize that horror, somehow exists in the things that you're seeing now. But the things that you're seeing now is like that tiny little house with like the laughing mouths on it, which just such like when they get to the wide shot of showing him that, where the town's dude is like sort of digging up all the missing victims, because I guess the town's guy kind of has an idea of where the sisters, sort of like buried the remains of the bodies of the people that they killed for the paintings. And just the way that that's like tackled, where it's very kind of like just sweaty and gross watching this towns too, just like dig up these bones and stuff like that. Meanwhile, like the employee from the church is essentially trying to like rape the teacher inside the house, and it's like cross-cutting between those two things happening at the same time. This is basically like the big climax of the film.
Yeah, and originally they were supposed to leave together, and he decided, because he was just so intrigued, that he had to dive in a little deeper. And
well, yeah, she's like, promise me you'll stop this crusade.
Right, exactly, and he doesn't, and of course it leads to a lot of people's demise, actually, not just Francesca or himself. So.
Yeah, when he goes in there and finds Francesca like strung up like one of the paintings by her wrists with like, knife wounds in her abdomen and things like that.
And the puddle of blood surrounding her, like it gets to that
again, point. The colors there, it's like the canvas she's against is like dark tan. The ropes holding her are like light tan. Her skin is like olive hued, and then there's just this dark red blood. It's not like Argento blood, which is this like very candy apple looking thing. It's this like red smear. It looks like dried blood.
Yeah, that's
like it.
Go ahead.
It reminds me a lot of like still life paintings of like cuts of beef. Like yesterday, actually, this year I've been trying to keep like an aesthetic thread going, basically, and I was looking at a painting Rembrandt did of like a slaughtered ox, which I'll actually post that in the call we have right now, and I figure you can just throw it up on the Twitter account with the show description or something. But it feels like of a piece with that kind of thing.
Yeah,
in the framing of the body too. It's a very artistically composed kill scene.
Yeah, I also noticed.
Yeah, and
that
it's also got all those tan colors and like browns and stuff like that. Yeah,
right. And because the color palette has mostly like tans and browns and stuff, when the violence happens or the art that always has violence in it, it kind of those are where like a lot of the colors come from. So when you're seeing death or whatever, that's where you see colors pop out of the screen, and everything else just kind of has that like tan color to it or brown.
It kind of replicates the painter's experience of wanting to paint like murder scenarios.
Yeah. Like you go from the white and brown and of like just the dirt and the bones from when they're digging up the corpses, and then to like the yellow house with the red lips and stuff, and that's the only like vibrant color in the whole shot. It's really cool.
There's red on blood. Even like the people mostly wear like either tan suits or like brown coats. The guy goes around the whole movie with like this dark brown necktie. Like there is only color in interiors of dangerous buildings. Like when he goes in the House of Laughing Windows for the first time, there is this like red cloth that's draped above a cabinet. Or as a little bit of foreshadowing, in the church, there is quite a bit of red on cabinets or like on Jesus's like sash. He has the protagonist rides like a red motorcycle. It's a very controlled palette. Like they really know what they're doing with the colors here.
Yeah, I like that bit when he gets on the motorbike and starts like riding back, because like what gets him to do that is like they find the townsman drowned in the ravine near the church. With more alcohol than water in his body, they say. But then shortly after that, he gets a phone call from Francesca, who he just saw, strung up and murdered, saying, how scared she is and how she's waiting for him, but he knows that obviously she died. He saw her body, and I like too that they don't let it linger too long on, is this something like supernatural? Like, is she still alive in some way? They actually cut to the murderer's hand holding the recording device up to the phone that he's listening to, where they essentially recorded her final moments before she died, the same way that he became obsessed by the old recording of the man screaming and dying from the opening scene. And that's what inspires him to get on the motorbike and head back to the house, where we just get an absolutely like insane finale.
And we know he's being led to something bad because of the information that was doled out to us. So that's interesting too, to just watch a man go to his death or demise or whatever is about to happen.
The climax has a lot of like ambiguously supernatural things, like the sisters who look like they haven't aged much from the original painting that they're depicted in, and the fact that the model of Saint Sebastian is still there. Like he's dead, but he has not decomposed a day. His hair hasn't gone gray either. It's like he's been preserved as this like eternal youth, like a portrait of Dorian Gray thing, just laying in this fucking weird art studio. And there's also a giant skeleton in formaldehyde in a cabinet, which is a very spooky image.
That is such a good shot. When he goes in and he sees the sisters stabbing someone to death.
I think it's the young guy that was raping.
Yeah, I was going to say
Francesca.
it's the young guy from the church, the employee that he was like kind of posing as like kind of like his friend, right?
Yeah.
So the sisters are killing that guy the same way that we saw in the painting of Saint Sebastian. But then they open up the cabinet, and it is supposedly their little brother, the painter, who is just in a giant jar inside the cabinet, just like this corpse sitting in there, which is funny when you think about it, because we're talking about how it seems like the sisters haven't aged at all, but here's the brother like decomposing in a jar, a giant jar of formaldehyde, which is really funny.
It's also worth noting that in that finale, when the sisters are stabbing, their like smocks and their headdresses especially are very nun's habit-esque.
Yeah, for sure. It's also a very strange thing to watch, like, because eventually the guy gets loose, he gets stabbed, and then decides to run away. And they have a minute sequence of them actually running after him in the woods, and he's just going through all the trees and stuff. It's almost like Chainsaw Massacre in a way.
Yeah.
But instead it's just two old women with knives, like just running after the guy. It was kind of, it was strange. And
and he's running into the forest the same way that like the brother supposedly was lit on fire and ran into the wilderness as well.
Right.
But this is the part that I was mentioning earlier too, because that's when he gets back on the motorbike and he makes his way back into town, and he's smashing on the doors, asking for help, being like, "There's something evil happening here, like someone help!" And everyone is just there's shots of people inside, their apartments, basically just ignoring his cries.
Sorry, man.
Presumably, because they know that the sisters require some sort of sacrifice, and we're not going to do it for them, but we're just going to let them do their thing. Yeah. We're just going to sit and be quiet, and
it seems anyone
sisters,
that helps
we're going to let the sisters Wicker Man you, okay?
Yeah, it's very much like a one's walking away from Omela situation, where they all know to live in this city you got to put up with something really evil happening, and I guess life there is just good enough that they're not going to complain too much when some random guy gets fucking got.
Yeah, you got to sacrifice a tourist every year just to live in this beautiful rural area.
Well, and then he makes his way to the church. Bad move.
Yeah, very bad move.
and the priest says one of the creepiest lines in the movie, which is, "That's a nice wound." Like Manhi would make a masterpiece out of it, and the priest starts like singing in like a woman's voice and reveals himself to be one of the sisters, because he was kind of looking at one of the paintings where he could kind of see sort of like more masculine features underneath like the nun's outfit or whatever in one of the paintings, and it turns out that the priest was either one of the sisters or was involved with the sisters in helping collect the victims for the painters and stuff.
Like when he reveals, he takes off his priest robe, and there's the white robe that the sisters were wearing with the blood on it. But I think he even she even has one of her boobs out too, and it's just like that was one of the strangest last 2 minutes of a movie. Like I was just not expecting the priest to also be like dressed up as one of the sisters. It's so much stranger than everything else that goes on. So I mean, I liked it, but I was like, damn, that was a curveball for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and the way it cuts to the face on the painting, and then the face of the priest like laughing maniacally like it is in the paintings while they're stabbing the guy, basically just letting you know that that's exactly probably what they're about to do to him, and then that's the end of the movie.
Yeah,
it just ends right there. Just the maniacal laughter.
Credits to maniacal laughter.
The exterior of the church, like a single hand clasps a tree in the foreground and freeze frame.
Yep.
And that's last shot, Evil Church.
It's one of the that was a really, really strange last 2 minutes that I appreciated for sure.
Yeah,
giallos are always fun like that, and maybe pivoting towards reductive rating round. This one at the moment, it's going to get the high 3 from me. I was kind of feeling like it. I feel like I need to give this one another watch, because it, for me the main thing was that it was a little bit slow. For me, just in the way that how much he was just being kind of doled out information through exposition. But there, as we've been talking about it, there is a lot of style going on in this movie. I feel like I'm so accustomed to like the most extreme Italian
Yeah,
style
I think
filmmaking.
Yeah.
When someone's a little more subtle with it, I'm like, you're not going Bava with this. I need to see some Black Sunday fucking craziness. And it might not be totally fair because I was just thinking about it, and I really like Don't Torture a Duckling, which also doesn't have that much sort of Argento craziness to it, but
It has more. It has a lot
it definitely
more
has a
than
little
this
bit
does,
more
yeah.
going on, just because Fulci he really doesn't shy away from how grotesque the aftermath of what's being done to these kids in Don't Torture a Duckling is, and also the big finale is very subjective in one of the characters that you've spent a lot of time with, and the big reveal for Don't Torture a Duckling is really, really nasty, and it ends in Fulci fashion on like a giant head smash on rocks and stuff like that. So Fulci really builds to that big climax, but I'm definitely leaning like as high a 3 as I could probably give. I think on this one, because as much as it does take its time, it does have a decent sense of atmosphere, and it does have a pretty damn spectacular finale. Which, even if it doesn't go full Fulci Argento, in either direction, doesn't go quite as stylish, or doesn't go quite as violent. It's talking about it, it's gotten under my skin for sure. Just the way that it merges the maniacal laughing of the paintings and the idea of sort of like art and death and preservation, and that big reveal of the body, the corpse, the rotting corpse of the painter being held in a giant jar inside a cabinet in the house. On top of also the creepiness of them recording the people while they're about to die and then playing it back through the phone. There's a lot of really creepy stuff going on in this. So
I'm
high 3. I think.
I'm gonna give it the high 3 right now too, but I'm right there with you. I think I want to rewatch this. I think I just had expectations going in, especially with that scene in the beginning with the kind of like sepia tone and just those close-ups of the body getting stabbed and the knife going into the flesh and all that. I was just expecting.
I definitely would have liked to seen a little bit more of that, because the transcendent aspect that they're referring to in that sequence.
Yeah, for sure.
Where in his final moment of death, he's screaming like, "Purity, purity, all my colors."
Right. So I would have.
Yeah, it hits at something a little bit more visually explosive in the finale than this eventually gets to, even though what they eventually get to is still very solidly done.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And once again, I really do appreciate the kind of almost dull color palette that's in the movie, because then every time there's violence or the paintings are shown or any type of art, really, because there's even that sequence where they show a wall of all of his paintings, and like all of them are just different deaths basically, and it's like one of the most colorful points in the movie, and all it is just people dying in different ways on a wall. So like just things like that I thought were really well done and intelligent ways to use color. And then once again, we always have a fun little weird, very strange finale that comes with these giallo films. A priest literally takes off his like mask and robes to reveal that he's one of the sisters that's been murdering people the whole time. Like, it's just so crazy and over the top, and I love that type of stuff. So yeah, I feel like I wasn't in the exact mindset that I should have been in going into it. I just had certain expectations, and I shouldn't do that when I'm watching a movie. So yeah, I just want to rewatch it, but it does definitely have great atmosphere, and I'm always just intrigued by any movie that's about somebody going into a town or just any space that they're kind of unfamiliar with, but it's holding a dark secret. I always love that. So high 3 for now.
This one's a 4 for me.
Nice.
I think for all the same reasons, I mean, you two have both discussed, and I definitely think the movie is like a victim of the idea of giallo, especially these days when giallo has kind of the stylish cream of the crop has kind of become the catch-all for giallo, which is fair, because I mean, like, Argento is the like pure version of this mode, but I don't know, when it's removed from the idea of like opera or something, this movie works really, really, really well. It's just this really slow, simmering, kind of inexplicable folk horror movie that just happens to fit these like giallo trappings.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite Italian horror movies because it does exist on that borderland between what like the British were doing at this time and the giallo stylings. And it's just strange. There's so many bizarre images in it, so many like unexplained supernatural flourishes. It's a movie that's really stuck with me in a way that most giallo hasn't.
Yeah, there are scenes like that that do appear kind of more supernatural, like winds would start to pick up and stuff like that, but they never really dive into anything like that. It's just kind of there for atmosphere. So yeah, I did like that.
Yeah. Well, I'd say that's the whole movie. You know, it's all there for atmosphere.
For sure.
Like if creating a horror movie is all about creating a particular atmosphere, then the logic of reality doesn't really need to apply.
Yeah.
In fact, it probably shouldn't. The more impossible it is, the better. Like
the scarier. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Like my favorite moment in Deep Red, to talk about giallo for a second, is the puppet, the doll guy, who walks into that room and shatters. And have you two discussed Deep Red, the podcast? I forget.
I don't think we've done Deep Red, no.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, there's one scene in Deep Red with like an impossible automaton that's never explained and it's never brought up again. But it's just the power of that image is like, it's like piercing, you know? It's like, as we talked about with Midori, like this idea of surreal horror where it doesn't have to make sense, but the image just has to kind of shock your system. And I think that House Laughing Windows is very good at that.
All right, well, I think that's going to wrap it up for The House with the Laughing Windows. We are going to be right back, and we are going to be talking about Guinea Pig 6, Mermaid in a Manhole.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Guinea Pig 6, Mermaid in a Manhole. Or is it Guinea Pig 5? Or is it Guinea Pig 4?
It's Guinea
You need to settle this debate for me right now.
Yeah, it's Guinea Pig 6. It was released 4th, but it is chronologically the 6th. I think it's mostly known as 4th 2 because in the DVD box set that Unearthed Films did, it was labeled as Guinea Pig 4. Which was, besides like illegal
some
tapes,
intern at the Guinea Pig bootleg company messed up.
Well, the only way you could watch these were like bootlegs, which, I mean, let's just get into Guinea Pig real quick, because Guinea Pig is one of my favorite film series, despite thinking that very few of them are actually any good. So I'm a sicko loser, and I watch a lot of gore films. And by gore films, I don't mean like gore films where like there's a plot. I mean like here's 45 minutes of gore special effects with someone being cut up. Sometimes it pays off. Sometimes I see some really fucking good movies that like change the way I view horror cinema or whatever. Most of the time they suck.
That's how we use you. We use people like you. We use friend of the show Steve Carlson because you guys will literally just watch anything. And when you or Steve give something a 4 and it's seen by 10 people and it's 20 minutes of someone being dismembered, I'm like, okay, that's probably the good one.
Yeah, watch list.
So those are the only ones I watch.
That's smart. I'm glad to take the bullet for you. But so Guinea Pig is the most famous series of gore films, I'd say. There's August Underground, but that's like a joke. No one actually gives a shit about August Underground.
Okay.
Guinea Pig is a Japanese series that was created by Hideshi Hino. He doesn't direct all of them, but it was like his idea. Hideshi Hino is an Iroguro mangaka. You could say he's like a contemporary of Suehiro Maru, but who did Midori. But while Suehiro Maru is very much a capital A art person, he has gallery shows and stuff. Hideshi Hino is a lot pulpier, a lot sillier. His style is very, very cartoonish, like newspaper cartoonish. It's a lot closer to like shoujo manga, like the idea of like 90s like girls manga or 80s girls manga, than it is to Suehiro Maru's, really, really crisp composed lines and such.
Okay.
So he makes kind of really violent manga, but also they're kind of silly and goofy. Most of the Guinea Pig movies...
When he started the Guinea Pig movies, did he know that, he was only going to do a couple of them, that he was going to have other people do them as well?
Yeah.
Okay. Because from what I understand, he's only made 2, right?
He's only made 2. He made the 2
and entry 6.
Yeah, he made the 2 good ones, in my opinion.
Gotcha.
Okay.
The first one, Devil's Experiment, is like a fake snuff film. It's faux, like, here's a videotape we found, and it's, these guys stalk a girl around, they knock her out, then they torture her and dismember her and
is that the one that Charlie Sheen watched?
No, the one Charlie Sheen watched, which is a great story, is Guinea Pig 2: Flower, Flesh and Blood, which Hideshi Hino directed. One of the great film titles, by the way, Flower, Flesh and Blood. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
And it is a Hideshi Hino adaptation of one of his manga, which is a man in a samurai outfit who is played by Hideshi Hino, kidnaps this woman and turns her body into art. He artistically dismembers her and preserves parts of her body in like a gallery. This is something that shows up in a lot of Hideshi Hino work, is the idea of...
Yeah, I was just going to ask that, actually.
Yeah,
it's like Mermaid in a
art.
Manhole, too. It's focused on an artist, so...
Yes. It's focused on a violent artist. A lot of his stuff's focused on a violent artist. His best manga, Panorama of Hell, is like a pseudo-autobiographical work that also features like an artist, like abusing and chopping up his family, among other people.
Okay. Is this guy married?
Should we be concerned? He seems like a fun guy. On Twitter, he posts about beer all the time.
All right.
Okay.
Good dude.
But yeah, then there are a bunch of like goofy.
Yeah, so we're just going to
ones.
assume for now that he's not a real life driller killer.
Yes.
We'll give him the benefit of the doubt on
Absolutely.
that one. But from what I understand, because I read that there was something about that Charlie Sheen watched that film. Charlie
Sheen watched that one and thought it was a real snuff film, which is, if you watch that movie, which by the way, I think Flower, Flesh and Blood's a great movie, you'd have to be really fucking stupid to think that's a real snuff film. Because like, damn, this snuff film director spent a lot of time stopping recording to change camera angles while someone was bleeding out. They're like God's eye view shots. Like, sorry, no serial killer is gonna, stop murdering someone and while their fucking like arm is bleeding out so they can go set up the camera on some rig on their ceiling. Like,
he was probably on a lot of cocaine too.
He was definitely on a lot of cocaine.
Yeah, but apparently he believed it was real, and he literally called the cops.
Yeah, he literally called the FBI, and the FBI investigated it, and we're like, these are very much special effects.
That's so funny.
Future Guinea Pig films would have like making of documentaries, and also future Guinea Pig films would be kind of goofy. Flower, Flesh and Blood is the last like fake snuff one. After that, they're all kind of like genre, more like supernatural genre-y works. There's He Never Dies and Devil Woman Doctor, which are like goofy horror comedies, like Sam Raimi stuff, basically.
Okay.
There's Android of Notre Dame, which is solid, which is a sci-fi, like cyberpunk body horror one. And then there is the best one, which is in like my top 5, top 10 horror films, Guinea Pig, Mermaid, and Manhole. And Guinea Pig,
the
Mermaid,
thing
and
that I was
Manhole.
surprised by Mermaid in a Manhole was that, like I had been you know, a lot of the reviews about it were, you know, they were talking about it like it was a shot on video, extreme gore kind of snuff thing. And I actually, when I ended up watching it, I was kind of like, this is more like kind of like character based and stylish for like a film that was described that way. Like I thought I was kind of prepping myself to watch kind of like an early torture porn era kind of thing. And I mean, you know, maybe also I'm super desensitized. I don't know. That could also be the thing here. Like I definitely wouldn't sit down and show this to someone else who, you know, like this is a nasty movie. It's really filthy, but there is more, you know, sort of like craft and character that is going into this than you know, I expected based on people's, you know, sort of like the reaction to it, the kind of hype around it. You know, the idea of this is one of the grossest movies I've ever seen, and I was kind of like, it is. In a way that I found, you know, sort of effective to this character's headspace.
Yeah, it's a gross
movie,
movie,
but
when
we break it down.
It's not. I mean, to basically discuss the plot, it is an artist who paints rot and decay, basically, which is, you know, a great setup for like a short horror story, which this originally was. It was like a 10, 20 page manga, and the guy goes down to the sewers to paint still lifes of things he sees in the sewer. He's depressed.
But the detail I kind of like about that, though, is that it didn't used to be,
yes,
you know,
exactly,
this really filthy, rotting sewer, and I think that's a really important part of getting into his character, because you're introduced with, like, you know, the shitty water and the worms and like soggy pieces of flesh, and like there's like a fetus just sitting in the sewer. It's really horrible textures.
There's like a dead cat that's covered in like maggots. And what you learn from like his neighbors is they mention, oh, there's the artist. He's so strange. His wife died, and he seems really upset. And you get the sense that this guy's life is going to shit because he used to play at this river all the time. There was this beautiful reservoir. We see old paintings of it, and now that reservoir has been turned into somehow, I don't know how it works architecturally, but it is a shitty sewer. It's like the most vile movie sewer imaginable. Yeah. But when he goes down here one day to paint, he finds a mermaid. And the mermaid is a mermaid from his childhood, who he used to see when he played in the river. And again, like House Laughing Windows, it's like this unexplained supernatural flourish, where they're not going to bother being like, wow, mermaids are real? That's crazy. Like, no, there's a mermaid. It's like a magical realist kind of thing.
Yeah, and she's sitting next to the maggot cat and the like dead fetus in the shit water.
She's just such a contrast to that too, right? Because she's got like, it's just nothing but brown shit water everywhere and trash or whatever. But then like the scales that she has are like pink and blue, and they shine a little bit, which was kind of an interesting contrast. Like she's first shown as very beautiful, you know. As opposed to all the trash that's laid around her, but then we get that shot of the cluster
she's
of
definitely the
boils.
bright spot of, you know, the place that he used to love and paint, right? Like he's remembering his time going to that river, and he shows us a lot of images. You know, he contrasts, you know, sort of like, you know, what these really horrible textures of what the sewer is now, you know, in the flesh, versus, you know, sort of like these really idyllic paintings that he did of this place as a child, and how that place has sort of changed and deformed over time. And it's something that, you know, he's interestingly, you know, he's kind of sad about it, but he's kind of making do with that. He's just like, this is what has happened, so I'm going to continue to paint, and I'm going to continue to paint, you know, using these beautiful strokes and colors and everything, but I'm going to paint, you know, what it is now. Yeah. And so there's this kind of idea of turning this horrible images into something, you know, kind of beautiful in their own way, and that is only amplified when he goes into that manhole. By the way, I love that low angle shot of him opening that manhole and all that light coming in.
The Ring, like when they have that shot in the videotape. Yeah, and it might have been inspired by that actually. So that's pretty cool.
I watched Mermaid and Manhole with a friend who was very drunk. I mean, I've seen it many times, but when I rewatched it recently, he was very drunk, and for the first like 4 shots of the movie, with like this really long takes with like a drifting camera, he was like, wow, this is like Hong Sang-soo. Perry, this feels like Hong Sang-soo. And I'm like, okay, man. And once that low angle shot came in, he's like, oh no, this is something else. But then he went right back to comparing it to like
that artist goes into that manhole. He's like, I'm feeling like Hong Sang-soo right now.
Yeah, it's a very
I do
visually
love
stylish
when
movie.
he goes down there. There's like, you know, he's talking about all my lost treasures are here.
Yeah,
and you know, he's talking about it kind of lovingly, like this is like his new place.
Yeah, it's
and
very much like when you're dealing with a movie about an artist, it's impossible to not view it as like an autobiographical thing, especially when it's you know, an artist who is dealing with like rot and finding beauty in rot. And, you know, it's like based on a mangaka by this guy who wrote and inked it, and he wrote and directed it. And he definitely feels some companionship with, you know, an artist who goes to an awful place and sees awful things, but finds beauty in them. Because when he paints these things, you're right, he's not like, oh, this is disgusting, I hate this. He treats it with the same reverence he treats the old sewer.
Yeah.
Or the old river, before it was a sewer.
Yeah, and I love that, you know, he's looking at all these horrible things, and he's like, all these beautiful things that I have ever lost, all this time I have lost, and he's referring to how it used to be this beautiful river, and there's flashings of the paintings and everything, and you're wondering kind of like, is it a little bit also the paintings are kind of serving as memory a little bit for him as well?
Yes.
That just the sort of image of them, like, and you know, obviously now it's a disgusting sewer with fetuses and rats and worms and pus and just everything that you can imagine. But, you know, when he finds that mermaid down there, he sees, you know, an old flash of it of what used to be there. Yeah. And sort of similar to House The Laughing Windows, he kind of is like, I need to preserve this before it's gone. Mm-hmm. And, you know, she is suffering from some sort of an infected wound.
Yes.
It feels like she's kind of like falling apart. Her tail is kind of like sticky and drippy and peeling off. So he takes her into his apartment where essentially she is asking him to paint her before, you know, presumably she's going to die.
And a couple things that are worth noting. One is that wound. It's the first bit of gore in this, and from the second you see that wound, you get, oh yeah, this is where the budget of the guinea pig movies go. Like, this movie is gorgeous. I think it's like a very well shot movie. The production design's great. The lighting, especially in the back half, is off the chain. But the wound looks like, the way I describe it is like when you get a piece of pizza and like there are air bubbles in it. And it looks like air bubbles with like red tomato sauce over it. It's a very texturally gross wound that she has spreading on her. And yeah, he brings her into his apartment in a bathtub. And the way they talk is he speaks to her normally, but she doesn't move her lips. She like psychically communicates with him. So she is begging him psychically, or at least because, you know, we're in the POV of this guy, he at least is thinking that she is psychically begging him to paint her. Which he does, you know. He starts painting her, and he's giving her like fish heads to eat. Or no, she's giving her whole fishes to eat and then throwing out the fish heads, which the neighbors are disgusted by.
I even love that close-up tracking shot of them like carrying the tub in for him.
Oh my god, like, so good.
Watching the neighbors for being like, why is he installing a giant tub? And now he's not ever leaving his apartment like he used to go out every day and paint things. Something weird is happening here.
And they start seeing all the like trash bags with blood pouring out of them and stuff. Things just start to evolve for sure. The suspicions grow.
Well, because basically as soon as the mermaid is brought out of the manhole, she starts dying.
Right.
Like her.
Yeah,
her
she goes, you better paint me. That is your mission. And she starts like posing like Kate Winslet in Titanic in the tub. She's like, paint me. But also that wound is starting to.
It grows rapidly. Like
it's
very quickly.
Starting to turn into like these really bloody boils.
Yeah. She's like a traditional mermaid in that her lower half, her like legs are a tail. Her upper half is like a nude woman. And originally her wound is just like on like her gut, and it very quickly starts spreading up her chest and then up her like armpit area. It's like her neck, and eventually, of course, it gets to her face. But basically, she is in horrible pain. Her wounds start like oozing.
Pulsating.
And pulsating, and he's trying to paint her, but she's always changing while he's painting her. And first he paints her as like this beautiful woman, but before he finishes, her like tumors, for lack of a better word, like on her body, these like big like pustules start oozing colored blood. Like bright.
They start to like pop and spew. This is like the gory mermaid equivalent of like watching someone pop a pimple in like a video.
That's way worse though. Way worse because they like shoot like fountains. It's like pressurized water. And the blood is like I don't like this movie very much, but have you discussed street trash on the show?
Yeah,
we have discussed street trash. We kind of had mixed feelings about street trash.
Well, the blood looks like the body melt stuff in street trash, where it's like these really bright, vibrant purples and greens and yellows that are dripping out of her body, and they are gorgeous. I mean, it's terrifying to look at, especially because you have really close-ups of these like gross things, but it's a really beautiful image, of she willingly like leans over and like squeezes them so that like the lack of a better word, the juices can like fall into glass receptacles, which he then uses he literally paints the portrait of her in her
blood and
prismatic blood. Yeah, her blood and pus. And as she evolves, his painting evolves too, because, well, he no longer has this beautiful mermaid to paint because her face is slowly growing pustules and her hair is falling out. And she's looking more and more like microwaved, basically.
Well, and I love too that, as she's talking about there's 7 colors inside these tumors, and please, I suffer so much, like, do this art fast, and so he's trying really hard to like squeeze these colors out of her and put them into his thing, and then he's trying to paint her, and as his painting is starting to change in shape and color, from this beautiful mermaid, like from the old paintings, his art is changing at the same time that literally her sort of biology is changing. And at the same time, also the style and the color of the actual lighting used in the film starts to change as well. Like, you actually get these like more prominent like greens and oranges, and like really harshly lit, like almost like neon colors in his filthy apartment. Start to kind of like develop as his actual art is changing. Like the art itself. It obviously, as it's taking on this tangible quality, as like the colors are literally just like this bloody pus that's falling out of her body, it's also having an effect on like the overall room that he's staying in and everything.
It looks very Mario Bava, like, for lack of a better word. Or for lack of a better comparison.
Mm-hmm. I also, the way that they film the clusters of boils or whatever, and as they expand, they start to do like close-ups of the pus and blood running through like the labyrinth of the clusters, which is just disgusting to watch, because you're just watching running blood and pus move in between all of the boils like it's some maze of disgusting like. Just
every once in a while, it cuts back to her flapping tail in the bloody water.
Yeah, that too. Just to remind you that this is still something even stranger. That there's a mermaid in this bathtub as well, not just a woman going through like a deterioration. It's
but watching her squeeze those colors into like those painting cups for him, definitely,
or him cutting
it brings
them,
new meaning to like suffering for art, or turning your pain and channeling it into something beautiful and colorful.
Because
and cutting them with a knife to it, like just get more blood out of them and stuff like that. He starts to do like halfway through the movie is also just another disgusting addition to the acts that are taking place.
Hideshi
the worst section for me is when she eventually, you know, she goes like full candy colored like mushroom woman is what she's starting to look like.
Yeah.
And the worms that start to writhe out of her pus spewing
there's like
boils.
And it's constant. They're starting to pile out of the bathtub. There's this one shot where you see like a group of worms in the foreground, and they're actually blurred because it's not in focus, and they just plop out of the bathtub, and you hear like the slap and everything of the ground hitting. It's just disgusting.
Well, and all those close-ups of like, you know, there's like a little crack where the you know, they were spewing the pus out of, and now there's like a worm trying to like move through it, but it's such a tight little space that it can't do it. So he has to start like pulling them out of her boils, like she's like giving birth to them. Or something.
And it even looks like there's more worms than just like a certain type of like the ground worm that you see. Like at one point, I think even like a green, almost thicker worm comes out of her and stuff. Like it's just it's ever
more
expanding.
than just worms.
The disgusting nature
there's
of it.
maggots. There are centipedes.
Right. Yeah.
And eventually, like things are like organs start coming out, like what looks like a small intestine or something, like plops out.
Yeah, it just keeps growing.
Oh my god, it really is. It captures every grimy detail. It's like all the stains on the tub and the wet slopping like sound design.
That's the majority
There's like a
of the
mucousy like viscosity to the effects that they're doing here. And when her intestines fall out, it's like they're being like slurped out of her.
The movie is very. It actually reminds me quite a bit of what I like about City of the Living Dead. And that feels very textured. Even when it's not texture of gore, like when it's just close-ups of like her scales or something, or close-ups of the painting, it's kind of ironic and in some ways very sad that this had to be shot on video, because it's clear that Hideshi Hino has an eye for the textures of surfaces, which doesn't really come across on video very well. But the gore close-ups don't feel like they're just there to shock you. Like, of course, he's you know, he wants to gross you out, but it feels like the painter, he sees a kind of strange beauty in these makeup effects. And if you're watching this movie like willingly and not in a dare or something, you probably also kind of see that too, because they're very handsomely done gore effects. Like.
Yeah, it reminded me of when we were talking about Fulci and how Fulci sees makeup artistry, you know, as painting. That
artistry.
What he's showing you is this really horrible gore effect, and you know, for a lot of people, they can't get past the idea that I'm watching a head being pulled off.
It's just gross.
Like that.
Right.
So that's just shock. That's all it is to people who can, you know, watch something that way. But to someone like Fulci, who was very into painting, he always saw it as, you know, where was that article from? Was it Film Comment? Perry, you might know this. There's a great Film Comment article on Fulci.
It's called like Fulci's Brush with Death or something.
Yeah,
it was when Mario Bava was playing at the MoMA.
Yes, and they mentioned that, like, you know, the way that he would use you know, sort of like the depth of the makeup effect was similar to the way that like Italian painters would actually do that. So like that's how he kind of viewed it, and you do get a similar feeling here, although regretfully it is not. You know, there's probably not going to be a 4K restoration of this. Like,
just imagine now
Fulci's other works.
Just imagine. I could see like if somehow Masker Video gets the rights or something and puts out some gorgeous 4K, or who's doing The Men Behind the Sun 4K? Is that Masker Video?
It might be.
Yeah, whoever did that would probably have a taste for a guinea pig 4K. Yeah.
This would definitely be something, because the textures on it are very, very gross.
Very
and the way
good.
Because again, she is there's an interesting relationship happening here where obviously there's something really gross happening, but both of them, character-wise, they both have the same mission, which is that you need to capture what's happening here and preserve it through your art. You have to paint me in the moment before I die, is something that she says. And then he starts to integrate this sort of like bodily transformation that she's going under into the painting, obviously using literally her body and her pus and her blood to incorporate it into it, but then also like what she actually looks like. That he starts, putting in the strokes, her skin peeling, her eye popping out, the tumors like literally squirting, blood, and it's cutting between images of the paintings and her, and then obviously the paintings too that he used to draw of the beautiful river flowing and everything like that before his life became the rotting sewer in his filthy apartment.
I want to circle back around to something you said earlier about the idea of like how he's literally cutting her and draining her for art, and that's something that Hideshi Hino, in like the works of his that I guess appeal to me the most, keeps coming back to, is the idea of the artist-muse relationship as inherently monstrous.
Kind of destructive.
Both of his guinea pig movies are about this. Both his guinea pig movies, I don't think it's any coincidence or mistake or whatever that both of them are movies about like aloof male artists who find a beautiful woman to torture and maim and do unspeakable things to in order to make their art. Like, it's very on the nose, but in a way that I think is very effective. Because
I was curious, is does the second one have a similar relationship to this, or is it more of he literally tortures and kills? Because I mean, technically that's what he's doing here a little bit, but there's something to be said like here about
this one is more
where
loving,
the mermaid is like she's asking him to do this for him.
Again, the mermaid's not talking; he is hearing. He's thinking she's saying that, right?
Yeah, and maybe that's a little more complicated as we get to the reveal,
especially
of the film
because there's a reveal that things are not what they seem. He's an unreliable narrator, and the way I read it is, she may have wanted him to paint her at first, but the things he's doing are clearly driven by like his own psychosis. And I want something again about the progression of the makeup effects into like this rotting, decaying body. And I think it's kind of cheap and kind of honestly kind of like racist when American critics are talking about like Japanese horror or Japanese body horror or something and come back to the idea of like nukes or Hiroshima or what have you. But I will say, because Hideshi Hino in Panorama of Hell, his big manga opus, is about like a painter who's born like in the direct aftermath of Hiroshima, which Hideshi Hino was. He was born in 1946. The way her body rots and like these like pustules and like this like just her skin falling off basically, and the shots of like her hair falling out feels very like radiation poisoning. Like there's this book, A Slow Death, 83 Days of Radiation Sickness, which is one of the most horrifying things I've ever read, which is a nonfiction book about the Tokaimura nuclear plant. Like the reactor went critical, and two guys working on it in 1999 got radiation poisoning, and one of them was kept alive for 83 days while he was like falling apart. And the book has photos of what happens to him
day by day, like progression.
Yeah, and the book is very much like here's the report, what the doctors did to keep him alive and what happened to his body. And you look at those photos of him and like it's a lot like the progression in this movie. And again, I feel uncomfortable making that assertion because again, it does feel very like that's the American view of contemporary Japanese horror, what have you, but I think you can make that argument that the parallels to like radiation poisoning and what's happening to this.
Well, and the way that it progresses, like this sort of like infection that is like disintegrating her body.
Yeah, it literally melts her body.
Like even the location that he found her, right? Like it started as this beautiful river and it's just decayed
and now it's a sewer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely some sort of like, you know, perversion or deformity that has occurred, and it's something that he's kind of wrestling with, you know, the feelings of loss that come from that, but then also as an artist, like, you know, sort of like what it is, what do you do in that situation? Like, what can you do other than, you know, as you see it painted?
Yeah, and that's what happens in the panorama of Hell manga. Is it's this painter who sees these horrible things that happen to people, and he's like, well, okay, I mean, I have to capture that.
Yeah.
And that very much feels like Hideshi Hino's MO.
Yeah, although I will say he definitely, I think you are right that the big sort of final things that occur in Mermaid in a Manhole definitely kind of undermine some of his perspective, or make the unreliable aspect of what we've been experiencing more blatant, as, you know, eventually.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because eventually he does capture her in her final moments, and there's this sort of portrait canvas, you know, of her, you know, deformed and with the tumors, you know, all over her face and her eye half popping out and everything like that. But eventually, you know, she just does die, and he did capture her final moments, but, you know, there with no time left to actually do anything to help her. And so he does the same way that he's kind of letting go of her, and he's kind of letting go of, you know, this sort of idyllic, because I love how it's cross-cutting with the river and everything too. He's kind of letting go of all of it and being like, I'm in this new world now. All of everything, my previous dream of what that river was and everything, it has just died with this mermaid in this tub in my apartment. It's all gone. That previous time will never come back. So he makes the decision to really finalize that dramatically.
Yes.
By dismembering her with a butcher knife.
Yeah, he takes a butcher knife.
And blood spraying everywhere.
Yeah, and the big reveal is when he cuts her open. One, there seems to be a suspicious lack of mermaid parts. No big fishtail around there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Two, she's very not pregnant when she's a mermaid, but when he cuts her open, there is a fetus that he pulls out.
Yeah.
And his downstairs neighbor is like, what's all this ruckus? And they go upstairs, and there's like this POV shaky shot with like this pounding synth. And my drunk friend who I was watching it with compared that moment to Heat, which I thought was pretty funny. Like when they're going to get Wangro.
This is where Michael Mann got it from, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. They open the door, and they see there is no mermaid, but there is a woman, and there is the guy with the butcher knife chopping now just the wood on the floor with his eyes rolled back, looking at the ceiling, being like, my mermaid's gone, my mermaid's gone. He gets arrested, and what we learn through dialogue is that his like mysterious missing wife wasn't so dead or gone after all until now, because she was the body they found, and she was kept in his apartment and tortured and murdered, basically.
Yeah.
And also it was implied that she was bedridden in the apartment
with
because
cancer.
She was suffering with cancer.
Yeah, which is, you know, probably where a lot of the definitely where a lot of the tumor imagery comes from. Yeah, and 8 months pregnant, which
of course.
And of course, so the big stinger at the end is there. You get this like final autopsy report, and this like really pretty shot that reminds me of one of the first shots in like Noroi, where it's just like the tape down on a spotlight. And it's this spotlight down. Here's all the stuff we recovered. Here's the murder weapons, et cetera, et cetera. And here is a single scale from a fish no one can identify.
Oh, man. That little bit of ambiguity.
Yeah, a little bit of ambiguity. Because it could be, of course, from like maybe the weird mutant fish this guy is feeding to the woman. But it's probably more likely that there is that the woman is both at once the mermaid and the wife, is how I read it. Mm-hmm. Like she's both. It doesn't make sense, but it doesn't have to. She's both. That's the only way you can square the circle.
Yeah, I also
definitely.
I also really I mean, it's gross, but I like the way they use it. I believe in the beginning, it shows him painting like a baby and floating in water, which I assume also represents like the just the sewer itself and the filth and all of that. And then they have that shot when the neighbors come into the apartment and you see the baby just sit like laying there on the floor, and so you kind of get
in the pile of dismembered body parts.
Yeah.
And that wide shot when they walk in, and it's slow zoom out of just revealing all of the body parts.
Great shot.
Just like, yeah, it's so good.
And you start to realize too that he was kind of giving you these images that were hinting towards the ending a little bit, and making that connection when it finally is revealed. It's just another added layer of like disgust.
Yeah,
because it seems like it was in his head
when
the
he
whole
finds
time.
that when you see that fetus in the sewer, because then you wonder, is this sort of some sort of anxiety about his upcoming fatherhood,
right, like a race
of some sort, or
that's what? Yeah,
well, it's like, is the sewer like some chthonic mental underworld, where he goes and he doesn't literally go there, but it's like a visual metaphor for him accessing like the darkness in his mind that was once the river. And that is also the only way to, I feel like an asshole trying to logically explain the events of this movie, but that is the only way to kind of also square the circle of like, how is it a river and now it's a sewer? It's not, they're not physical places. They're representations of his headspace.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's definitely this more idyllic past and this sort of like really filthy transformation that it's gone under, and sort of like his acceptance that there is no going back to that he is just going to join the filth in his own way.
Yeah. One of the reasons why I picked both these movies is this ambiguity they have, in the sense of the idea of the images in them as very representational rather than literal of horror. Reminds me a lot of like my favorite kind of horror fiction, which is very rare to find on film. And that is, again, a horror where it doesn't necessarily expect you or need you or even work best when you view every image in it literally. And that's not to say that it has to have some grand metaphor behind it, but the idea of images in horror and supernatural happenings that aren't like, oh, there's literally something supernatural happening in it, but just this is some weird psychological outgrowth.
Right. And then also it not being the, it's just a dream.
Exactly.
Like it's not that either. It's a combination of all of this stuff is representative of something that really matters to this person that you are experiencing, their experiences with them.
Yeah, in a way it reminds me of like when people talk about like Lovecraftian stuff, they usually mean, cosmic horror with old gods and stuff. But in a way it reminds me of that strain of supernatural fiction, weird fiction, what have you, like Lovecraft or Poe or, Arthur Machen or someone. Or even the guys I go to when I think of these two movies are like Borges or Kafka or like Thomas Ligotti, where they're entirely psychological realities. They're not occult horror per se. It's not like there's demon worshipping cults or something, but there is some demonic or evil aspect of reality.
Definitely. Well, maybe pivoting towards reductive rating round on Guinea Pig 6, Mermaid in a Manhole. I love saying that title.
Yeah, it's fun.
It's very good. Yeah, I think this was a very solid to maybe even a high 4 from me, which again, going into what so many people talked about is kind of like a gross out extreme gore exercise. It's like 60 minutes. I will say I was not expecting so many sort of ideas about as Perry brought up, the idea of sort of like an artist using a muse and reducing, a real tangible person into a piece of art, or the idea of channeling, pain and the transforming, deforming nature of time into your art. And, this is surprisingly very character-driven, psychological, and kind of melancholy film that I kind of wrote up briefly when I was writing my review of it, that it was, it's very much this idea of art as a colorful reflection of your dreams and the people around you and, your surroundings. And that sounds like a really nice movie until, your surroundings are a sewer filled with fetuses and filth. And, the person you love is this cancerous, infected mermaid covered in pus-filled tumors.
That's ever expanding.
And ultimately your dream is to, in your way, join them or put them out of their misery by very violently dismembering them, getting some sort of closure on this, past life, beautiful, idyllic river that will never come back to you, and just joining the disgusting sewer.
Yeah.
And taking your wife and unborn child with you, perhaps.
Good Lord. Yeah.
Good vibes only.
I'm also gonna give it a 4 out of 5. Something I wanted to ask you, Perry, was just this is the first time I watched it, so kind of having that those same delusions that the artist has while you're watching it, you can kind of get on board almost more so with what is going on, but knowing that it ends up being just him hacking his pregnant wife in his apartment for 24 hours. Does it, like, the second watch, does that affect you at all?
Yes,
like,
it's uncomfortable.
How does that affect you? Okay, see, I was curious.
Because you become more cognizant of things like the fact that she never actually speaks.
Right.
Things you kind of take for granted on the first watch. And,
Absolutely.
like, the inconsistencies, a lot of the stuff with, like, the downstairs neighbors, which I thought was kind of annoying the first time around, I really like on rewatch, because they are these, like, very incongruous elements. They're kind of like goofy comedy neighbors. But by introducing them, it does throw the nature of the reality of the film into question. Because, like, wait, this is what normal stuff is.
Yeah,
this is like
exactly.
It's a very different POV and tone with them, because they're all lit like boring. They're all lit like
daytime.
I don't know. I think it's very clever, and it's a very controlled movie in a way that, most people wouldn't give this kind of thing credit for.
Yeah, for sure.
We will hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a 4 out of 5 for me. I mean, even, and just, not necessarily even speaking about the narrative, but just the way he shoots the gore. Like, once again, I mentioned the absolute, like, labyrinth of clusters of, like, tumors and the blood and pus just running through them, and he's constantly doing close-ups of that, and then just, like, wide shots of her in the bathtub while the clusters are, like, spurting out blood like a fountain. Just it's one of the grossest things I've ever seen, but in a way still oddly, like, you're right, it's like oddly beautiful the way that it's lit and the way that it's shot. So until the ending, you can kind of understand his mentality a little bit. I'm curious as to what I'll feel like on a second watch, but it's very interesting. So yeah, I'd give it a 4 for now.
I was also very happy to learn that the guy who plays the artist, Shigeru Seki, he is also the Toastmaster in Takashi Miike's Audition.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's awesome.
Right. Something that we should mention, I can't believe I forgot. The woman who plays the mermaid, Mari Somei, appeared in some Pink films, appeared in this, and after this mysteriously disappeared, and no one knows what happened to her.
Whoa.
What?
Yeah, she vanished.
Yo, this is a snuff.
She's gone.
That's crazy.
She's gone.
Okay, this is okay. Now we're getting into sus territory.
Yeah. We don't know.
We need to check up on Hideshi.
Yeah, for real.
She just dropped off the face of the earth.
That's like
she was dismembered on camera as a mermaid.
That's like that conspiracy where all the Giallo films are like all the actresses they can't find anymore, so they must have actually killed him
Right,
in
yeah,
those
they
old
must
Giallo
have.
movies.
Yeah, Argento was being paid by the
Right.
mob or something to off someone for real.
But he made
Which
art
is,
with it.
yeah.
Good
This
lord.
is Sleazoids After Dark territory.
Yes,
for any of
we-
our Discord patrons.
We're at it. Now
they
we're on
like
the
to
show.
solve conspiracies after midnight in the Discord. So Perry has just sent them on a rabbit hole. I hope that
That's
the
right.
After Dark listeners are looking into this as we speak.
Yes, boys, solve the case. We can do it.
Yeah.
Good lord, that's crazy.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
on that note, I feel kind of bad for now saying, yeah, this is a 5. This is one of my favorite horror films. And films like this are the reason, like, I'm not blowing smoke up your ass or anything when I say, like, this kind of movie and being able to talk about this kind of movie is the reason why I think this podcast is, like, incredible. Because these are the kinds of movies, again, that are completely written off. Like, not even, like, Arrow Video isn't coming around to give this one a second shot, right? But when you look in the filth of movies, if you're the artist in this and you spend time in the sewers, you can find strange beauty in the filth. Mm-hmm. And that's why I love talking about this and why I love bringing on, like, Midori, is because they are, when you meet this kind of thing on its own terms, you'll find something that's unlike anything else. You know, there's no movie like Mermaid in a Manhole. I've seen a ton of other movies in this genre too, and there is nothing remotely like this. And it's just this fascinating anomaly of cinema, you know? It's a movie that got made for a series based on fake snuff films, but instead it became like this psychological, magical, realist, romantic drama, character study, gore film. Like, it's incredible.
About the maybe even parts of the ethics of doing
of making this kind of
gore
movie.
art.
Yeah, and even besides like the novelty of it and the boldness of it, it is just this incredibly tight constructed film. Like, Hideshi Hino clearly has a vision as a director, and it breaks my heart every day that he only made these 2 movies. Because he's a very talented mangaka, but honestly, I prefer him as a filmmaker.
Yeah, I would have liked to see more from him as well. I was surprised to only see that he had 2 films.
Well,
but
I'm
hey,
going out and checking out Guinea Pig 2 at some point.
Oh,
too.
yeah.
I noticed though that some of his work has been adapted though, right?
Yes, some of his work has been adapted for TV movies. Some of those are actually quite good.
Oh, cool.
Okay.
Which is the one? Yeah, The Boy from Hell by Mary Asado, who's a female filmmaker who directed the adaptation of the game Fatal Frame. And she directed one of the Ju-on movies too. That movie's crazy. The Boy from Hell is really worth watching.
Cool.
I'm gonna
Watch this down
right now.
Was that 2004
right. Well, I think
or 1988?
2004.
2004.
Gotcha.
Very 2004. Very fucked up digital vibes.
Cool.
Very, very cursed movie energy.
Beautiful.
Nice. That will shoot it up the list of watching for sure.
Yeah.
Hell
And
yeah.
50 minutes.
All right. Well, I think
Love
that's gonna wrap it up for everything this week. That was the house with the laughing windows and Guinea Pig 6 Mermaid in a Manhole. Thanks, Perry, so much for joining us and coming back and for once again traumatizing many of our listeners. I'm sure.
Hell yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Well, listen, it seems to be...
both the ones who eventually check out the things that we're talking about and just the ones who don't, like to listen to podcasts that talk about pus spewing boils.
Hey, well, I mean, that's...
And taking
listen,
a fetus out of a stomach and all that.
Listening to a show called Sleazoids is an occupational hazard.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They know what they signed up for. But Perry, what's going on in Perry world? What you got anything to plug while you're here?
Yeah, well, last time I was on the show, I talked about a little movie I made called Sungazer that was hopefully going to be hitting up film festivals. Then film festivals died, so I just put out on Vimeo. You can watch Sungazer
to a
on
real
Vimeo.
one.
Although I will say, probably a solid chunk of you listening have checked it out, and thank you very, very much.
Yeah, it's very good.
Besides that, I've been doing a lot of fiction writing. If you like the kind of horror I've been describing about like a psychological unreality without it's supernatural, but not like, overt supernatural, I've basically spent the past 12 months just writing a bunch of that. I got some keep looking at my Twitter because I'll be discussing whenever I have short stories coming out. I have a poem, like a erotic grotesque poem, upcoming in an anthology collection called The Big Book of Little Deaths. I have a short story in a book I edited called Beyond the Book of Avon, which is a collection of short fiction in tribute to one Lucio Fulci. That by the time this episode comes out, it might be sold out because it's limited run, but I would check just in case. And
yeah, we plugged that one in the Discord, telling people to get in on it just so that it doesn't sell out, because obviously we helped get that kickstarted because it sounded amazing, and there was a lot of people who have either guested on the show or are patrons of the show who also wrote stories. Like I know that Mike Thorne wrote a story.
Yeah, Mike Thorne wrote a story.
And, Kai Perignon is one of
Kai Perignon wrote a story. Trevor Henderson did the cover art, which is this gorgeous sacrilegious painting of like a crucified zombie.
So many friends of the show have stories or have helped put this together. So I'm very excited to get my hands on that one. Obviously, also Fulci. We need more Fulci in the world.
Yes, we do always.
And two more things to kind of announce officially here, I guess.
Oh.
I have a story I wrote that is kind of an homage to Suehiro Maru, who wrote the manga that Midori is based on, that I am looking to release as part of a zine with another like tribute short story from another writer who will go nameless right now because we have not confirmed it 100%. And I am working on a zine of film criticism that is going to be based on depictions of the ocean in movies, where I will be talking about like Zombie 2, Miami Vice, Jean Painlave, Night Tide, Takeshi Kitano. It came from
I was going to
Beneath
say,
the
you got to
Sea.
get Kitano in there.
Yeah, the
I've just
Flying
been going
Luna
through
Clipper,
all of his stuff, and he's got as many, if not more, oceans than Michael Mann.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a section I have planned that is mostly focused on the differences. Well, not mostly, it's largely focused on the differences in texture of the beach in Okinawa and California in Brother and Sonatine. So, fun stuff like that. If you want to read about how the ocean is something evil and destructive, then keep an eye out for Unnamed Ocean Cinema Zine.
This is awesome. Character assassination of the ocean.
That's right.
Listen, the ocean...
We're taking it down.
No, the ocean is scary. The ocean is evil. Like, low-key. No, the ocean's a bad place.
Absolutely.
That man was genuinely not meant to go there. It's evil. I'm not doing a bit.
Awesome. I would genuinely recommend checking out everything that Perry named there for sure. Oh, yeah. For our listeners, we're going to be back in 1 week's time, where we are going to be celebrating St. Patrick's Day on the Sleazoids network. We're going Irish mode. We're talking about Irish excellence. We're going to be talking about Leprechaun 2,
right,
and Leprechaun 3, the direct-to-video sequel to Leprechaun 1 and 2. So for the Patreon listeners, feel free to go trash mode with us. We're going to be talking about
real trash
not even
mode.
a C-tier slasher franchise, probably a D-tier slasher franchise that doesn't even seem that people really even care too much for the first one.
No.
People seem to, like, even if you like it, like, I don't mind the second one, but it's still one of those things that I know is complete and total trash. Like, it's just, I don't think anyone, like, unironically likes these movies. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
We'll find out. Yeah, maybe we'll get people yelling at us about the Leprechauns.
I look forward to it.
And how they are very important pieces of American Irish heritage.
Well, I mean, obviously, you're already going all in the anti-Irish racism, so it only makes sense that you would fucking hate the Leprechaun movies.
That's right. So that's what you guys can expect on your bonus episode for next week. Warwick Davis telling nursery rhymes and murdering various people. And then the week after, we're going to be having, finally, special guest Eddie Averill from the Extended Clip podcast on the show to bring his double feature that he basically suggested over a year ago now. I think he's mad at us. I think he's been asking to do this for a while. But we're going to be talking about Targets.
Oh, hell yeah.
By Peter Bogdanovich, as well as Brian De Palma's Hi Mom.
Very awesome.
So we are going to be talking about sort of like late 60s American radical, really dark, darkly
Very
even
dark.
funny kind of films.
By having Eddie on, are you weighing in the extended clip versus blank check feud?
I actually guested on their Patreon exclusive show, Bank Check. So I think I already have.
Well, but you're having. Oh wait, is Bank Check a blank check spinoff, or is that an extended clip thing?
That's an extended clip.
Oh, okay. Then you definitely have already weighed in.
Absolutely. No, we stand with our boys at Extended Clip.
Oh yeah,
fight to the death.
The sickos at Blank Check will not take our boys down.
They will not.
Absolutely
how much they review bomb them. Our boys are standing tall. They're going to come on the show, and Eddie's bringing towering films, Targets and Hi Mom.
He is.
Very excited to talk about
I'm stoked.
those with him in 2 weeks' time. That's going to be your guys' free episode.
Targets is definitely a movie about Eddie and Griffin.
That's what's up. All right, I think that's going to wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks so much, everyone, as always, for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.
See ya.